Distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Like so many others, I've anticipated this report for quite a long time because of my own interest in the dynamics of regional governance, particularly the political sustainability of CARICOM, as well as my more recent explorations of moves beyond CARICOM to explore pan-Caribbean integration. We've already heard this morning various interesting perspectives on the contents of the report, and so therefore I want to make my interventions focused and brief. While I acknowledge the desirability of further and more in-depth analysis of the report on my part, I will focus my comments on three issues arising from the report, which relate to the engagement of ordinary people, particularly young people. And indeed, having arrived this morning to recognize that perhaps a generation, among other things, separates me from the other distinguished panelists, I'm even more convinced of the need to focus on this issue of young people and their concerns about the quality of governance. Indeed, these concerns, which may have escaped wider public attention, must be examined in light of the fact that if CARICOM is to be sustainable, it must at this stage attract the interest and commitment of young people who will lead the process in the next decade or so. Although my generation was not around when CARICOM was established, we grew up with the hope that member states would implement their commitments to deep integration and particularly a single market and economy. We took common examinations. Some of us attended this regional university, and yet true free movement remains elusive. Indeed, the Commission's emphasis on the full implementation of the movement of people, of labor, as a criterion for Jamaica's continued participation in the CSME is entirely appropriate. As a result of this area of non-implementation, there is growing frustration with the movement among the relatively few young people who have been sensitized to the promise and potential of integration, and I speak of those who have attended the UWI, who have served as CARICOM youth ambassadors, and so on. But there is also a growing level of suspicion among the majority of young people who know very little about CARICOM. In the words of the youth who shared their perspectives with the CARICOM Commission on Youth Development, they said, "We know too little of the Caribbean to consider ourselves citizens." The challenges posed by youth ignorance in many cases, ambivalence in others, and growing disinterest overall has not escaped the attention of this Jamaican Commission. It has recognized that these issues strike at the heart of two main hindrances to CARICOM's sustainability. One, the implementation deficit, and the participation deficit. And so let me touch on 3 points related to these challenges, which are of particular concern to young people. These are: 1, addressing the implementation deficit through accountability; 2, improving the quality of governance through transparency; and 3, combating exclusion through youth engagement. First, let me address the issue of the implementation deficit and relate it to the concerns by young people about the current state of regional governance. The long-standing debate on preferred modes of governance associated with the, for some, troublesome issue of national sovereignty, on which my own scholarship has focused, is perhaps now, I realize, less relevant in the light of global trends of regional fragmentation, including what the Commission refers to as a crisis of supranationalism in the EU. In effect, although this debate on intergovernmentalism versus supranationalism is likely to continue in the academic and political leadership circles, the dominant theme within discussions among young people is not necessarily the mode of governance, but the effectiveness of CARICOM governance. Simply put, younger generations are impatient of institutions that do not work, whatever their nature. Young people are calling for more accountable regional institutions. In that regard, the Commission's recommendations for legislative reform to correct the implementation deficit are significant. the most compelling of which relate to imposing strong sanctions on member states for non-compliance with commitments made, coupled with implementation of more stringent measures to monitor and evaluate the performance of the Secretariat and CARICOM institutions. Sanctions were among the main proposals made by Jamaican youth in 2013 during the consultations held as a part of the change facilitation process by the team tasked with preparing CARICOM's first strategic plan. The youth called for, in their words, penalties for countries that do not adhere to the rules of the community. By way of illustration, I note the Commission's dissatisfaction with the fact that the CARICOM Youth Development Action Plan, scheduled to be implemented between 2012 and 2017, was still in draft at the time of reporting. That plan has since expired, and to date, no advice has been given to the young people as to its future. And without the appointment of a new Deputy Program Manager for Youth, young leaders have voiced their concerns about the extent to which rhetorical promises of youth inclusion can be regarded as serious commitment. It would not be inappropriate for youth to expect that this area of neglect should be amongst the first for application of sanctions. Indeed, the commitments to implement an updated strategy for youth development have been enshrined in the Declaration of Paramaribo on the future of youth in the community. Let us not relive the experience of the 2010 Special Summit on Youth, convened by heads of government themselves, but only attended by 3 of them, comprising the chair, secondly, the youngest Prime Minister at the time, and third, the Prime Minister or the head of the Secretariat's host country. And there was limited ministerial representation by other countries. Former Prime Minister Golding has mentioned the record of participation already. However, this was the first case in the history of the use of the special summit mechanism to have so failed, not only the young people, but the entire community. One young commentator described this experience as, I quote, scant disregard for the region's youth. Young people are calling for leaders, governments, and institutions to be accountable for their actions. Similarly, young people are paying close attention to a particular issue that the Commission aptly refers to as, and I quote, an irritant that fuels cynicism. That is the need for students from other CARICOM member states to pay a fee to facilitate their leave to remain while studying in Jamaica at the UWI Mona campus, an institution of the community. Notably, this matter of inconsistency and double standard remains outstanding on the agenda of decision-making bodies since 2006. This is also expected from a youth perspective to be amongst the first candidates for action by Jamaica if it wishes to signal a true interest in the advancement of the needs and aspirations of young people, and if it wishes to exercise leadership on the recommendations made by its own commission. And I make these remarks against the background of Jamaica's impending chairmanship of the community. The issue of accountability of member states and institutions is important, but another facet of the challenge, however, is ensuring that citizens are adequately equipped to hold them accountable. In that regard, on the second issue of quality governance, I was disappointed to learn of the experience the Commission had in seeking to secure information on the status of member states' budgetary contributions to the Secretariat in the course of its research. What then of the rights of citizens to know what their governments do and how it is done, whether unilaterally or collectively with other governments? I am cognizant of the fact that the troublesome principle of sovereignty ensures that rights of citizenship, like access to information, are bound to the member state, as we have not yet evolved to adopt full regional citizenship. However, in the context of the intention to pursue a CSME, surely there is need for development of a complementary framework for transparency that allows Caribbean people to be kept fully informed of the activities associated with regional integration, including those issues of public expenditure which affect the viability of regional programs. In that regard, the disclosure by the Government of Jamaica of the status of its contributions to CARICOM institutions and bodies contained within the Commission's report is to be commended. This means that any citizen of another CARICOM country will have ready access to that information via the web. The report is available online. On the converse, the lack of transparency within the regional context is worthy of reproach. And I turn to the final area, third area, combating exclusion through youth engagement. Youth participation can no longer be a phenomenon of tokenism in the modern governance era. Since the adoption of the Declaration of Paramaribo, CARICOM has been committed by heads of government to, I quote, explicitly recognize and clearly articulate the role of youth in Caribbean development in an amended revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, and to ensure that this role is enshrined in national and regional development strategies, together with provisions for youth mainstreaming, youth-adult partnership, and youth participation across all sectors. This extensive partnership commitment stretches the boundaries of how we currently approach youth participation. So finally, I wish to comment on the Commission's treatment of what it refers to as youth focus, which addresses the need to, I quote, introduce youth to CARICOM. While public education is an important means of encouraging participation, I propose that a youth engagement model is much more essential. The difference is that a public education approach seems a little bit like a one-sided attempt to co-opt citizens into participating in an existing framework. While the alternative, the youth engagement approach, is about providing opportunities for young people to participate alongside others in the shaping of that framework. The former is about manipulation and control, while the latter is about partnership. This may mean that whether in online or offline discussions, political leaders and technocrats alike within the Secretariat and other bodies of the community must be prepared to engage young people who hold visions of integration which are vastly different from theirs, and who may have moved beyond today's considerations to more radical views on what Caribbean community means. For example, youth leaders have long been celebrating Caribbean Youth Day with young people from right across the Caribbean, ignoring geopolitical considerations and embracing youth from Cuba, the non-independent territories, Mexico, and further afield in their celebrations. This pan-Caribbean mode of working echoes the pro-political integration, pro-moving beyond CARICOM visions, which have been documented in meetings of young leaders in 1998 and 2010. How willing and prepared is CARICOM to stretch itself to engage beyond the boundary? Organic forms of pan-Caribbean youth association and integration need not be taken over by CARICOM in any misguided attempt, as has been suggested in other fora, to create a CARICOM Youth Day or transform Caribbean Youth Day into a CARICOM Youth Day in order to strengthen youth commitments to regional identities. Rather, CARICOM should respect and encourage these expressions of people-led regionalization, recognizing them as the popular foundations of integration movements, which can serve to strengthen acceptance of the notion of community without alienating non-CARICOM youth, many of whom look on with admiration on what CARICOM has achieved to date. Before I close, let me also take a moment to caution on the temptations to treat social media as a panacea for addressing the youth participation deficit. While I fully support the recommendations to engage youth through a wide variety of online and offline platforms, We should be mindful of the limitations of online engagement. There are examples which demonstrate the reproduction of patterns of exclusion online that already exist offline, especially in the context of varied internet penetration rates and access across the region and within communities. It is best that we invest in the human resources needed to engage with young people wherever they are having discussions about integration, whether that is online, offline, in their leadership councils, in school, or perhaps less likely on the corner. As the Jamaican government, and for that matter other governments in the region, contemplate this welcome report and consult with their citizens on its recommendations, I would hope to see more meaningful efforts towards a more effective process of youth engagement on the regional integration agenda. The input of young people is required today to ensure the sustainability of the CARICOM integration process tomorrow. Thank you.